Alright, be honest with me. How many times have you told yourself that things are finally going to be better before falling back into your old cycles only 2 weeks later? Whether it's finally wanting to get that chiseled physique with six pack abs, not blowing your checks immediately on DoorDash orders or Funko Pops, or just simply cutting out your horrible diet and actually eating something that doesn't have a sodium content high enough to smoke an entire nursing home. The point is, we all want to cut out the bad habits in our lives, but we feel like we can't because those habits that hurt us are so ingrained in our brains. Now, I get it. It may feel like it's almost impossible to break out of that cycle and that we're going to be stuck there forever, but the reality is that it's not. And today I'm going to talk about the steps that I took to actually break the cycle and make that change in my life, and how you can too. So, starting off, what is it that makes us consistent with something? Is it limitless motivation, insane amounts of mental fortitude, smoking crack? Well, drop your meth pipe, folks, because the real answer is pretty fucking boring. It's habits. They say on average it takes around 66 days to form a habit. Now, once we do form those habits after that time frame, it's important to realize that habits are an incredibly powerful thing. Because each day we do something, those neural pathways in our brains get stronger and stronger, which means that positive changes or negative changes become exponentially easier. What this also means is that the trajectory of our lives may rise or fall exponentially depending on the habits we choose. And this becomes both a blessing and a curse, and whether it is either one is entirely up to us. Whether we're sitting there deciding to smoke joints all day or hitting the gym hard, once you develop that habit, the longer you maintain consistency with it, the harder it is for that habit to break. And that's ultimately why we struggle to stay consistent with the shit that we do a lot of times. It's because we're trying to force out something that's been ingrained in us as a result of our previous consistency with said bad habit. Now, the good news is that if we have the bad habits ingrained in us, then that also tells us that the good ones can be too. And the way we go about it is by starting small and building up to the big changes. Now that we talked about habits and how it relates to consistency, this brings me to the first big mistake people make when it comes to consistency. It's that people go 100% in and expect to be able to maintain it indefinitely. The reality is, when you do that, you'll see decent progress at first, but then you'll ultimately gas out because the demand was too high. At the time, you use motivation as a fuel source to power yourself through the hard shit when motivation itself is fleeting. And as soon as that motivation is gone, you now have no way to get through the workouts, diet, or whatever it was you were trying to do, and then you lose your progress when you can't maintain it anymore. Sure, I get it. It's nice at first to go 100% when you're feeling really passionate, but ultimately, making those small changes consistently over months results in a hell of a lot more progress than doing insane workouts for only a week or two. Once you get to that point where it becomes a habit, that's where you can start building up to the bigger workouts. So for the love of God, stop gassing yourself out and build yourself up so that you can actually do the hard-ass workouts all the time versus never. Now, bringing this back to my experiences, when I was in the fire academy, my PT instructors told all the other recruits and I that they expected us to be able to run a nonstop 5 miles without having a single one of us fall out. Now, mind you, this was week 1 after running only a fifth of the distance, with a quarter of us already puking our guts out afterwards trying to maintain their pace. At the time, in my head, I was thinking, we couldn't even get to 2 miles without falling apart. How the fuck were we going to manage to get to 5? Well, to cut to the chase, we built up to it. Instead of jumping straight to 5 miles, the next week we did 2, and then 2.5, and then 3, and so on. We made it a habit to run an extra half a mile every cardio day, and before we knew it, by the end of the academy, 5 miles straight was easy as fuck, and we got through it without a single one of us falling out. We were miles ahead of where we were, literally, and it's because of that small consistent improvement. So no matter what it may be, the gym, budgeting, social interactions, strive to run that consistent extra half a mile in your life so that you can reach that 5. Alright, so now that we know what the fuck a habit is, and how we need to stop trying to be David Goggins on day 1, what is the next mistake people make when it comes to changing their lives and being consistent? I'd say it's reliance on motivation. Motivation is a great tool and makes traversing the hard times so much easier when we can find it, but what happens when we can't? The answer is we fall apart. This is why we need to rely on discipline instead of motivation. The common theme amongst people who achieve great things in this life is that they don't rely on motivation, and it's because of the discipline that they can be consistent. Now, motivation itself is defined as a temporary emotional state that drives action, whereas discipline is defined as a consistent system of behaviors and habits that persist regardless of feelings. But enough of the nerd shit. What does this tell us? This tells us that motivation itself is unreliable, and that we only tap into it to achieve action based off of our emotional state. So the answer to the whole consistency issue is developing discipline. So how do we go about doing that? In order to develop discipline, you need to start doing shit that makes you uncomfortable. I'm not saying to go out in the middle of Baltimore and fistfight rabid crackheads all day, even though that is pretty fucking badass. But I'm saying to push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit. For instance, saying hi to that cute ass girl or boy in your class, opting to drink water instead of slamming another beer, or just getting the fuck up for a walk when you don't feel like it. When you take your feelings out of the equation on a matter and implement that action without your feelings driving said action, you're going to realize that you can suddenly get exponentially better at reaching your goals. For me, one way I achieved this was by going out of my way to compliment random ass people I saw on the street or at work, regardless of how I felt. Now, I've always been an incredibly introverted dude, and for the longest time, the thought of talking to a stranger oftentimes paralyzed me because I was terrified of what they would think. So when I got tired of being inept at the one thing humans are supposed to be good at, talking, I made an effort to prove that I was more than my anxiety and forced myself into social interactions. To say that I was terrified would be an understatement, but guess what? Because of that fear, I eventually got comfortable with being uncomfortable, and I was able to get past that paralysis because of discipline. I'm now at a point where I don't even think twice about talking to strangers and don't have to live with constant anxiety from being out in public. What this taught me was that when I learned to rely on discipline, I was able to overcome my anxieties consistently, so I know the same can be said for you too. It just starts by building up that discipline. But hey, I'm probably going to make another video talking in depth about how we can build up discipline as a whole, but right now I just want to plant those seeds in your head so that you can realize its value. Alrighty, so moving on, the last thing I want to talk about here in regards to how you can be more consistent is setting measurable goals for yourself. Now, this kind of covers both previous points, but I would feel incredibly wrong if I didn't bring it up at all. If you want to be consistent, you're going to need to know what it is and what you want to do, and tackle each goal one at a time. For instance, let's say you want to be healthier, right? Well, that's a very broad thing, so we need to break it down, because if we don't, we're going to be very overwhelmed with the amount of work we need to do. One way I did this was by fixating on a certain thing I wanted to improve. So for example, for most of my life, up until recently, I'd always been pretty obese. I knew I wanted to have a body to be proud of, I knew I wanted to be comfortable taking off my shirt at the beach, and I knew I wanted to stop feeling like shit all the time. So what did I do? Did I immediately start running, lifting, and implementing extreme diets immediately? Yeah, fuck no. What I did was focus on one facet, which began with my diet. I realized at the time that I had a portion control issue right off the bat, so over the next few months, I made a conscious effort to limit my portions. And because of that, I was able to drop nearly 50 pounds. Once I got to the point where I felt pretty good about my weight, I was able to then lean into putting on muscle, and so I started lifting. This eventually led me into running, and then before I knew it, by achieving each of these goals, I was now at a point where I could definitively say that I was legitimately comfortable with who I was physically. And it began by achieving one goal at a time. So for yourself, I'd say focus on the broad goal and then break it down from there. Kind of treat it like a video game if that helps. And, in a way, in order to progress the story, you need to beat a mission to move on to the next. So choose that mission for yourself so you can beat that campaign. You want to lose weight and be healthy? Start with your portions. You want to be rich? Focus on budgeting. You want to be socially competent? Say hello to those strangers. Set those goals for yourself and focus on them one at a time, and you'll be able to become that person you dreamed of, one mission at a time. But hey, with all that over with, I hope you found this video helpful and maybe got some use out of it. Whether it's learning to slow down, building up your discipline instead of relying on motivation, or setting those goals for yourself. By implementing all these lessons in your life, you'll be able to grow so much and finally free yourself from those fucked up cycles that continuously pull you down. I believe in you, you got this shit, and until next time, have a great day.